The final battle of the 1745 Jacobite Rising is often framed as a tragic last stand on a bleak Scottish moor. This romantic view obscures a cold reality. The campaign was a structural impossibility from its inception, making the defeat at Culloden a predictable, mechanical outcome. Analyzing the Rising as a failed strategic project reveals that victory was never a variable within the Jacobites' control. The entire venture was predicated on a single, non-negotiable requirement: massive, direct military intervention from France. Without French regulars to provide the necessary mass to challenge an 18th-century superpower, the Jacobite army was a fatally under-resourced instrument. This fundamental flaw invalidates the popular what-if debate surrounding the army's retreat from Derby. Reaching London would not have altered the strategic calculus. It would have merely isolated a small rebel force deep within enemy territory, ensuring its eventual annihilation. The final proof of this failed strategy was the choice of battlefield. Culloden Moor was a geographic trap, a flat, open expanse perfect for the government's professional artillery and disciplined bayonet lines. It systematically neutralized the Jacobites' primary weapon, the Highland charge, before it could even build momentum. Culloden was not a battle lost, but the inevitable conclusion to a campaign doomed from its first principles. The Jacobite cause was built on a single, non-negotiable requirement: a full-scale French invasion. The precedent for this dependency's failure was set a year before Charles Stuart even landed. In 1744, a French fleet assembled to support a rising was wrecked by a storm, an event that should have served as a final structural warning. For any seasoned military planner, this confirmed the extreme vulnerability of the entire strategy. But driven by what historians identify as youthful impatience, the prince proceeded, gambling that his personal charisma could substitute for professional military mass. This was the foundational error of the campaign. His decision forced the Rising to rely on a purely Scottish force, an army often romanticized as a tribal horde. This popular image is a distortion. Surviving regimental order books from the 1745 campaign make it clear the army was organized conventionally, mirroring the structure of its British and continental counterparts. It was formed into regiments, often aligned with clans to leverage social coherence, but the command framework was intended to be professional. It was not a disorganized mob charging south. However, this conventional organization was a facade hiding a critical, amateur-level weakness. Where the army fundamentally failed was in the core military science of the 18th century: supply and logistics. It lacked a functional commissariat to systematically secure food, munitions, and pay. Without the logistical backbone of the promised French army, it was, in effect, a well-organized rebel force, not a state military. It could march and it could fight, but it could not sustain itself during a prolonged invasion of hostile territory. This logistical ceiling predetermined its strategic limits. The Jacobite army was therefore a strategic illusion. It possessed the regimental form of a professional force, but lacked the logistical substance, an instrument fundamentally unsuited for the task of conquering Britain. The decision to turn back at Derby was not an act of betrayal or cowardice, but a moment of military realism overriding political ambition. Lord George Murray and the other commanders recognized their position was untenable. With barely 5,000 men, dwindling supplies, and no sign of the promised French landing, they were caught between two converging government armies deep in hostile territory. The march on London was a gamble on an English Jacobite uprising that never materialized. To continue would have meant certain annihilation far from their Scottish support base. The retreat was the only strategically sound option available. It was a forced error, dictated by the campaign's flawed premise from the start. This retreat, however, triggered a critical shift in the government's response. After the Jacobites won another victory at Falkirk on January 17, 1746, the government replaced its defeated general, Henry Hawley. Command was handed to the Duke of Cumberland, the king's second son. For Cumberland, this was not merely a military assignment, it was a personal crusade. Historians note he viewed the rising as a virus to be eradicated, bringing a new level of ruthlessness and determination to the campaign. His appointment professionalized the government effort and signaled that the final phase of the conflict would be a war of annihilation, not negotiation. The Battle of Falkirk itself was a Pyrrhic victory that sealed the Jacobites' fate. While they won the field, the battle provided the British Army with invaluable tactical data. For the first time, some government line regiments stood firm and successfully repelled a Highland charge. They proved that with sufficient discipline and firepower, the Jacobites' most feared tactic could be broken. Falkirk demonstrated that the charge was not an unstoppable force of nature, but a specific tactical problem with a solvable mechanical solution. This lesson, learned in defeat, would be systematized by Cumberland and implemented with devastating finality. The victory at Falkirk gave the Jacobites false hope while providing their enemy with the key to their destruction. On the night of April 15, 1746, the Jacobite command attempted a desperate tactical gamble, a night march to surprise Cumberland's resting army at Nairn. This maneuver required precise coordination, which the fractured army lacked. The rough terrain of the moorland disrupted their columns. French regulars struggled in the dark, while advance Highland units moved too fast, stretching the line to a breaking point. By dawn, they were still 2 miles short of their objective. The attempt was aborted, leaving the Jacobite forces exhausted, starving, and completely out of position just hours before their final test. When battle commenced on Culloden Moor, the geography itself dictated the outcome. Lord George Murray had warned against this location, recognizing it as structurally disastrous for their forces. The Highland charge required 3 specific conditions to maximize effectiveness: a downward slope, confined space to funnel momentum, or a short sprint. Culloden offered none of these. It was a broad, flat expanse stretching over 500 yards, broken only by boggy ground and enclosure walls. As the Jacobite left wing advanced, it immediately blundered into a morass, forcing units to veer right and collide with their own center. This terrain neutralized their shock action, turning a coordinated assault into a congested, slow-moving target. Cumberland capitalized on this geographical trap with cold, mechanical efficiency. His professional gunners initiated a relentless bombardment, firing solid round shot that tore through the stationary Jacobite lines for nearly half an hour. When the frustrated Highlanders finally charged, the artillery switched to grape shot, shredding the advancing columns at close range. Those who survived the crossing met a reorganized British infantry, employing a modified bayonet drill. Instead of lunging directly at the man ahead, whose tarred shield provided cover, each soldier was trained to thrust to his right, striking the exposed flank of the attacker, engaging his neighbor. This combination of terrain, artillery, and disciplined infantry drill systematically dismantled the Jacobite assault. The Highland charge did not fail due to a lack of courage. It failed because it was an outdated, one-dimensional tactic colliding with the optimized machinery of an 18th-century professional army. The gunfire at Culloden marked the end of a military conflict and the beginning of state-sponsored pacification. The British government systematically dismantled the Jacobite support base, targeting the clan infrastructure itself. This was not merely a punitive expedition, but a structural eradication of the Highlands' capacity to wage war. The Stuart cause was permanently extinguished on the moor, transforming from a viable geopolitical threat into a romanticized relic. Read academic histories for deeper context on how logistical realities and structural power dictate the outcomes of war, stripping away the myths of rebellion. History teaches us, if we listen,